9 countries are preparing for war over rocks and reefs. The South China Sea. $5 trillion in trade passes through it every year. 11 billion barrels of oil lie beneath it. And China just militarized 7 artificial islands to control it all. This isn't about tiny islands. This is about who controls the world's most important waterway. And it's closer to war than most people realize. This is the South China Sea conflict. And here's why it could reshape global power. The South China Sea is 3.5 million square kilometers of ocean, bordered by China, Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei, Indonesia, Taiwan, and Singapore. It doesn't look like much on a map, but this body of water is the most strategically important piece of ocean on Earth. Here's why. 1/3 of global shipping passes through the South China Sea. That's $5 trillion in trade every year. 80% of China's energy imports come through these waters. 60% of Japan's and South Korea's trade routes depend on it. If this waterway closes, the global economy crashes. But it's not just about shipping lanes. Beneath the South China Sea lies 11 billion barrels of proven oil reserves and an estimated 190 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. That's enough energy to power Southeast Asia for decades. Whoever controls these waters controls the energy security of half the world's population, and China wants it all. In 2014, China began the largest military construction project in modern history. They took 7 tiny reefs in the Spratly Islands and turned them into military fortresses. Using massive dredging ships, China pumped millions of tons of sand onto submerged reefs, creating artificial islands where none existed before. Then they built runways long enough for fighter jets and bombers, installed advanced radar systems and anti-aircraft missiles, constructed deep-water ports for naval vessels, and stationed thousands of military personnel, all on islands that didn't exist a decade ago. The largest of these islands is Fiery Cross Reef. It now has a 3,000-meter runway, enough for any military aircraft China operates. It has underground bunkers, fuel storage, and ammunition depots, and it sits right in the middle of some of the most disputed waters on Earth. Subi Reef and Mischief Reef have similar capabilities. Together, these 7 islands form a military triangle, covering the entire southern portion of the South China Sea. China calls this defensive construction. Everyone else calls it what it is, militarization. And it's changing the balance of power in the region, because now China has permanent military bases in waters that 5 other countries claim as their own territory. China's claim to the South China Sea is based on something called the 9-dash line. It's a line that China drew on a map in 1947, and it claims almost the entire South China Sea as Chinese territory. This line extends up to 1,000 kilometers from China's actual coastline. It comes within 50 kilometers of the Philippines, 80 kilometers from Vietnam, 100 kilometers from Malaysia. Basically, China claims everything. In 2016, the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague ruled on this claim. The Philippines brought the case challenging China's 9-dash line. The court's decision was unanimous and unambiguous. China's claim has no legal basis under international law. The 9-dash line violates the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. China's artificial islands don't grant territorial waters or exclusive economic zones, and China has violated Philippine sovereign rights in the West Philippine Sea. It was a total legal victory for the Philippines and international law. China's response? They rejected the ruling completely, called it nothing more than a piece of paper, and continued militarizing the islands. Because international law only works when countries choose to follow it, and China chose not to. Since 2016, the military buildup in the South China Sea has accelerated dramatically. China now operates what's called a cabbage strategy. They surround disputed features with layers of vessels. First, Chinese maritime militia, fishing boats with military crews. Then, China Coast Guard ships, the largest Coast Guard fleet in the world. Finally, People's Liberation Army Navy warships, layer upon layer like wrapping a cabbage, making it impossible for other countries to access their own claimed territories without triggering a military confrontation. The Philippines can't fish in waters 50 kilometers from their own coast. Vietnamese oil rigs are forced to shut down by Chinese vessels. Malaysian exploration ships are harassed and expelled, all without a single shot being fired. But the actual military forces are preparing for something bigger. The United States conducts freedom of navigation operations, sailing warships through disputed waters to challenge China's territorial claims. China scrambles fighters and sends warships to intercept. These encounters are becoming more frequent and more dangerous. In 2023, a Chinese destroyer came within 100 meters of a U.S. guided missile destroyer, forcing the American ship to slow down to avoid collision. That's dangerously close, and it happens regularly now. Meanwhile, every country in the region is buying weapons. Vietnam ordered Russian submarines and fighter jets. The Philippines is modernizing its Navy and Air Force. Malaysia is upgrading coastal defenses. Indonesia is building military bases on outer islands. Everyone is preparing for the possibility that this economic dispute becomes a shooting war. If conflict breaks out in the South China Sea, it won't stay local. Japan's economy depends on shipping through these waters. South Korea's trade routes go through the South China Sea. Taiwan's energy security relies on these sea lanes. The United States has mutual defense treaties with the Philippines, Japan, and South Korea. An attack on any of them could trigger American military involvement, and that turns a regional dispute into a great power conflict. This is why the South China Sea is considered one of the most dangerous flashpoints in the world, not because anyone wants war, but because the economic stakes are too high to back down. China can't give up its claims without losing credibility and energy security. The Philippines, Vietnam, and Malaysia can't surrender their territorial waters without giving up their economic futures. The United States can't allow China to control the world's most important shipping lanes. It's a deadlock with no diplomatic solution in sight, and every year the military forces get larger, the artificial islands get more fortified, the naval encounters get more aggressive. Something is going to break. It might be a collision between ships. It might be a shot fired during a tense standoff. It might be a Chinese attempt to occupy another disputed feature, but the trajectory is clear. The South China Sea is moving toward conflict, not because anyone wants it, but because $5 trillion in annual trade is worth fighting for, and 11 billion barrels of oil is worth defending. The South China Sea doesn't look like a war zone. It's mostly empty ocean, small islands, and shipping lanes, but beneath the surface it's the most militarized body of water on Earth. 7 artificial islands armed with advanced weapons, hundreds of military vessels from multiple countries, fighter jets on standby, and nuclear-armed great powers with conflicting claims, all competing for control of the world's most valuable waterway. This is the $5 trillion war, and it's already begun. It just hasn't turned kinetic yet. But when it does, it won't be about rocks and reefs. It will be about who controls the future of global trade, energy security, and power in the Indo-Pacific. The question isn't if tensions will escalate. The question is when, and whether diplomacy can prevent what military buildup is preparing for. Subscribe to Vector Military for more geopolitical and military analysis, because the South China Sea conflict is the war nobody's talking about, until it's too late. Like and subscribe to Vector Military. Watch these 2 videos on screen next.